Hey everyone, this is Sam from Warhammer Online. This is the third part in the Spider Fang Grot videos, but it's also a standalone video for how to do swamp bases. So regardless of why you're here, hopefully it's to see how to make and paint some swamp bases. Now I've tried some different products on this, just personally because I'm going to be doing my own human Skyfleet army, which is using swamp bases, so I wanted to test some products. So there are some steps in here and some products that you don't necessarily even need to use, but I've included the trial and error of them so that you can see how certain products worked and didn't work, and then you can choose what you want to put on your bases. Hopefully it will help. I'll put a list of all of the products I've used and we'll get on to actually building this base to start with. So to start out, we've got a base, we've got a twig, which I found from outside. It's been dried out fully. Make sure you dry out any natural materials that you find outside, because if they're damp, they'll go all nasty and horrible. I've also got some cork. I'm still trying to find the holy grail of cork, which is perfect snappable stuff that doesn't have too much flex in it. The flexible soft stuff just seems to be a bit rubbish compared to the snapping stuff. I'm just using PVA glue to stick this to the base, and I'm kind of peeling off the edges so that it doesn't actually fall off during gameplay. Now, one thing I would do instead of using PVA glue is using a hot glue gun, and when I'm going to be doing 100 of these bases in one go, what I do is I get a hot glue gun out, all of the cork I need and twigs, and I'll hot glue them all down onto the base because it gives it a much firmer and more durable fix to the base. PVA is great, but it's not as strong as hot glue. Hot glue is literally the best product you can use for sticking materials down to bases and even doing models, not miniatures. Don't start sticking your space marines together with hot glue, but scenery pieces and things like that. So sticking them to bases, hot glue is definitely the way to go. So I've just put some of these bits of cork and twig in a random arrangement on the base, and I'm dipping it into sand. Now this is sand, it's got some slate in there. Over the years I basically just drop some slate onto the base and then drop it into this sand pot, so bits and pieces have accumulated inside this pot. Now you can make your own mix. You can get some very fine slate, put it into some sand, and that way you'll get some variation in the textures on the base, and I think it's definitely the best way to go rather than just having flat sand by itself. But I'm just making sure it's stuck to the base, and we can move on to the next step, which is using the Vallejo thick mud. Now this stuff I found is not as good as sand in my opinion. It's great for bridging the gap, so between the cork and the sand, if you don't want there to be too much of a gap or a ledge between the levels, this stuff is perfect because it kind of gives you a gradation up to the cork slab that I've put down. And I was just testing it to see if it worked as a ridge, because I wanted to do some crackle paint and possibly some water effects towards the end as well. So I wanted to see if this stuff would work well enough later on. I've also used wet crackle effects from AK Interactive, and I'm not going to lie, this stuff was terrible. I used 3 coats of this and let it dry fully. I tried applying it thinly, I tried putting it on quite thick, and obviously mixed the mixture up quite a bit. I used the end of a paintbrush and just basically stirred it around for ages to try and make sure that it was all fully mixed together. I don't know if I got a bad batch of a pot or what, but this stuff just the Games Workshop crackle paint, the Agrellan Earth, and the other one, the Martian one, they work so much better. But I wanted to show you the process of me, putting this on the pot on the base and trying it out, just to show you what it looks like. For the Agrellan Earth, it needs to be applied quite thickly, and you get the best cracks from it. If you apply it, basically, if you put too much on, it will just fall apart. If you put too little on, it won't crack enough. It will just look like you've smeared some paint over your base, and you don't really want that. So put it on, be quite liberal with it, and just move it around and let it dry fully, and then it will crack over time. And I think on my bases for the Caradon Overlord army I'm going to be using this crackle effect on the lower down parts of the bases. So where I've used the AK Interactive crackle effect, I'll be putting Agrellan Earth instead. You can see this is once it's dried. The Agrellan's cracked perfectly. The texture paint from Vallejo has dried quite nice. It looks quite wet and gribbly. And then the brown AK Interactive crackle paint pretty much just went nasty. So I pulled it off. I did a second layer of this stuff. So I put this on even thicker than I did with the first. Actually, this is the third attempt of putting this stuff on, and I let this fully dry just to give it one final one final go before I thought, you know, scrap it and move on to something else. And it cracked better than it did before, but it didn't look very good. So I won't be using this stuff in future, which is a shame because I love most of AK Interactive's products that I've ever used. Next, we've primed this. So I've used black, Chaos Black, and I've just sprayed above with Corax White. I used the black just to make sure I got all the shadows, and then I made sure I covered the majority of this with the white so that we can put quite thin paints and washes on this, and it will make painting the base really fast. So we're using Rhinox hide. It's mixed down quite heavily with water, and I'm just going to cover the entire base with this, making sure it goes into all of the nooks and crannies. I don't want to leave any of the white showing, so I'm just going to go over this, and I do 2 thin applications of this paint wash and make sure that I cover it all and then fully dry before we go on to the next step. Okay, so we're going to paint the twigs. I'm using Mornfang Brown. It's my favourite paint for doing wood and you know, the weapon handles and things like that. Anything that's wood based, I use Mornfang Brown as my go-to colour. So I'm just going to paint all of this. We are going to use a wash on it later on, again, just to test the product, see what it looks like. But I think you can get away with just using Mornfang Brown, and you don't really need to do much else on that. You can see it's quite a nice colour. It stands out from the rest of the Rhinox hide base, and it looks like a twig, like it should do. Next, I'm going to use my, this is a colour that I use pretty much on every base that I do from now on. It's called Carrack Stone from Games Workshop. This stuff is amazing. You can highlight most colours with a lighter tone, so you can use greys or creams or anything like that. And this I've found works for every base I've ever done. You can do a very light dry brush, and you can see I'm brushing it on the back of my hand, not because I'm, you know, a little bit, I'm not weird, honest, but I just rub it on the back of my hand just so I can feel how much is coming off the brush, and then I just drag it over the top of this texture quite lightly, and you can see it's just picking up on those cracked areas and really making them pop. Same for the sand, you can just very lightly go across the entire base. I'm going to do the twigs in exactly the same way. You really don't need to think too much about this. You just kind of cover the whole base in a very broad rough highlight, and then we're going to wash it and darken it down again with some products in a moment. But this is the key to doing bases. You don't want them to take too long because you've got lots to do. You've got enough to focus on with the actual model that's going on the back of it. So you don't really want to put too much thought and, well, too many colours and things onto the bases. The reason I've gone a little bit overboard on this one is it's almost a test piece. So I can find out what products work, which paints are worth using, which ones are worth skipping. And then when I do my 100 bases in a go, I know exactly what I'm doing. I don't need to think about it. And I don't need to test it and see what works and what doesn't. So I'm not wasting time. I'm doing it on one base, and then I'll replicate the best stuff over the 100 that I'll be doing later on. Now, I'm a big fan of AK Interactive's wash. The Summer Curse Girth is the go-to wash that I use on everything. And I've tried this. I've bought plenty of washes since then. And this is Dark Mud. I've never used it before. I wanted to try it on here. It's the right sort of dark and gritty colour that I need for the swamp. So I wanted to, hopefully, it was going to work the same as the Summer Curse Girth. I don't think it's as good, but Summer Curse Girth wouldn't work for a swamp base. So this is the best alternative that I could have used. If you don't want to use the enamel paints, the enamel washers, you can get away with using things like Agrax Earthshade and mix it in with a bit of Norn oil just to make it darker, but you won't be able to do the removal step, which I'm doing in a moment, so you just need to thin it down a bit with medium instead. So once I've applied that over the entire base, I get a cotton bud, some white spirit, and I very lightly just drag it over the surface, and you can see the dark mud has gone into the recesses, it's darkened it down, it's also stained the surface. So it's really good for sand and cork and things like that, because it literally just stains it, and you're using the white spirit to remove the excess. You do go through cotton buds quite a bit, so you need to use both sides of the cotton bud, and I know it's not great for the environment and I feel really bad about it, but this is my way of doing bases, and you know, you could probably do it a little bit better, find your own way that works, but this is how I do it. You can see as well, I'm not scraping with the cotton bud, I'm almost rolling it in my fingers just over the surface, so it's not pulling up any of the texture. If you're too hard with this and you start scratching away, you will remove sand and texture and things. You want to be really as gentle as possible, but make sure you're still removing it. And I dip it in the white spirit and dab it onto a bit of tissue just so that it doesn't pool the area with white spirit. Now I'm using Wood Stain from AK Interactive. This is number 263. It's another wash. I never used it before. I wanted to see what sort of effect it did on the twigs. It darkened them down quite a lot. I think if you were doing burned or burnt wood, or it kind of works because it's a swampy base, but I think it's quite dark. I think it looks almost like it's been treated wood rather than natural wood. So I'm just using white spirit to remove as much as I wanted from this. The great thing about these AK Interactive enamel products is if you put too much on, you can remove it with white spirit. So you really can experiment, and if you don't like it, you just remove as much as you want. And you can see here I didn't follow my very gentle dab technique with the cotton bud, and I just scraped away some of that twig. Not good. Okay, another test from AK Interactive's products, and no, these weren't sent to me for free. I bought them, so not under any sort of sponsorship. This is Slimy Grime, and I wanted to use this almost like moss. It's another wash, so I've just kind of poured it into some of these areas underneath the twigs, around the cork, any areas where I thought moss might build up and start to grow over years. And I think it adds it makes it look more swampy in my eyes. I think swamps should be dark browns and greens, and there's a lot of brown going off on this base, so I wanted to add some more green to it as well. And this is the same enamel products as before, so if you put this on and you think you've done too much and you've gone a bit overboard, you just get the white spirit and a cotton bud and you remove as much as you want. If you've done far too much, you can even get a brush and just pull in some white spirit and remove it that way instead. So you can see here I'm just going to remove some of the excess, some areas where I don't think it needs it, and some areas where I think I just want it to stain the underside of the sand, and I'm just going around and carefully removing where I don't want it. The base is starting to look quite nice now. Obviously there's been a lot of steps that have happened so far. Now if you're doing a 10 or 20 or 100 of these bases, you'll do each step as a process. So you'll do the first 10, you'll do green on all 10 of them, then you'll get the white spirit, go back and remove whatever you were going to remove on all 10 of them. So you make a batch process, you go through them in 10s and 20s at a time, and it really does speed up the process of getting these bases done in one go. So the actual painting part of this base is done. I'm going to finish this just using the Abaddon Black. I'm going to paint the rim of the base. You really don't need to see how to paint the entire rim of a base. And then we're going to go on to the next experimental part, which is putting on flocks and tufts and things like that. So this is a new line of flocks that I've been using. This is from Javis Scenics. So I've bought 3 just to try them out and to do a bit of a variation. I've bought the light, the mid and the dark fine tufts. Not tufts. Fine flock, I can't remember what they're called. And I've also bought some ivy. Now this is from a company called Mini Nature, without the E at the end of it, it's spelled differently. And I've also got my trusty Games Workshop tufts. These are I believe these are Mordheim ones. So I've just put a bit of PVA glue on the base where I want to put some of this stuff, and I'm using the back of a paintbrush, and I'm just going to stick this tuft down a little bit better. You can use super glue to glue these down, but I've found sometimes the super glue reacts with the bottom of the tufts and you get a horrible white crusty finish on the bottom of it. So I stick to using PVA glue even though it's not as good of a bond. And I'm just using the Javis flock here. I'm kind of sprinkling it on over the top of the pot, and I'm tipping up any excess back into the pot again so I don't waste as much and I don't make a mess all over the work surface. I'm going to do the same. I've put some PVA glue on the other side of the base, and I'm using the mid green now, and then I'm going to put some light green in, and I'm going to put some dark green. And the reason I've done this is just so it's some variation. When you look at pictures of swamps and you see things outside in the world, plants and things don't segregate themselves to certain spots. You get a good mixture of colours and textures and heights of things as well. So I wanted to try and include that on the base. The Summer Ivy is a really nice product. It was quite expensive. I say expensive, it was about £5 for a pack of this stuff, and I'm using a small amount. You're not going to be using it all over your bases, so one pack is probably enough to do you know, probably 1,000 points worth of models if you're doing Warhammer. And you can see I'm just kind of stretching it out. It is quite pliable. You can move it around and put it where you want it. And I'm just going to put this in the center of this base and PVA glue it down. It is quite brittle, like the leaves that are attached to the little branches that are on here do fall off, so I'm going to coat this in some very thin down PVA glue just to try and make it more durable than it is right now. And the PVA glue will just it will dry, it won't even look like you've covered it in anything. If anything, it'll have a slight sheen to it, which is fine because it's in a swampy environment, so it will work with the model that I'm working on. But all in all, that was quite easy to stick down. Definitely going to pick some more of this ivy up. I'm going to be doing quite a number of bases with these. And I'm going to add some of my own small leaves to this base as well. Now, these were punched out of real leaves using a product from Green Stuff World. It's basically a hole puncher, and you can go out, pick up a leaf, and then put it into this hole puncher and just punch as many leaves out as you want. And all I'm doing here is putting PVA glue on the base, and I'm going to sprinkle some of these leaves onto the base wherever I want them to go. And all I'm going to do after that is get a paintbrush and just tidy some of them up, you know, so you don't have like 20 leaves all on top of each other. I'm just going to spread them out so that they look a bit more realistic. Saying that, you do get wind pushing leaves into the same corner all over the place, so maybe it is realistic just to dump them all in one place. Okay, so it's almost dried, and I wanted to add a bit of a grungy feel to the base. It was all looking a little bit too bright for a swamp, so I've used Athonian Camo Shade, which is a wash from Citadel Games Workshop, and I'm just putting this over all of the Javis Scenics flock. I'm also going to add it to some of the tufts, and I think it definitely makes it look a little bit more gritty and more like a swamp base, as opposed to like a woodland forest base. If I was wanting it to be brighter, then I'd leave it as it is, but this Athonian Camo Shade definitely changes the feel of the base. Now the final step, I really wanted to add some water effects, and I bought this swamp green. This is water gel swamp green from AK Interactive again, and I looked at the outside of the tub and I thought that looks great. Opened it up and thought, what the hell is this? But it definitely dries differently. In a second you'll see the final spinny video again, and you leave it and it just dries by itself. And this is by far one of the best products I've bought from AK Interactive in terms of water effects. I've bought loads over the years. I know 2-part resins are the best way to go for water effects, and I just find that this is really simple and easy to use. You take it out of the pot, you put it on the base, and you let it dry, and it dries a really nice dark grungy green colour. So massive plus for this product. I definitely recommend picking it up. I'm going to see what other water gels they've got. If they've got some different colours, I'll try those out, but this will definitely work. A whole pot will easily do the army that I'm working on, and I'll probably have some spare for the future as well. So good stuff, and we'll see how it actually dries in a moment on the finished result. So there we go, that's the video done. I hope it helps. I know it's been quite a long one for a base. Normally I do like up to 10 minutes, but we have done like a brief overview on building as well as painting and trying and testing some new products that I generally have never used before. So it's been a good one. Hopefully it's helped you. If you do enjoy this video and you like these basing videos and everything that I do, please hit the like button or thumbs up. Share it around if you think anybody will benefit from this. And thank you very much for subscribing to the channel as well. It definitely is appreciated, and it continues to motivate me to create more of these videos. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.